This year has been an absolute shocker, and as Rishi Sunak stressed in his bleak spending review, things are not going to get better until 2022. We're looking at around 2.6 million people out of work come spring, and young people are taking the hit hard. According to the Resolution Foundation, youth unemployment is on course to be as bad as it was in the 1980s. When young people are plunged into poverty, so are their life chances. 1 million children registered for free school meals this year. That was on top of 1.4 million that were already receiving them. Even before the pandemic, the attainment gap between poor and wealthy students was going in reverse. For the first time in 12 years, this is not a great baseline for young job seekers. Meanwhile, over 90,000 people have been threatened with homelessness, and more than half of these have lost their accommodation. Many of these include young people who worked in hospitality, for example, have lost their jobs and are struggling to support themselves. And as if things weren't tough already, young women and people from ethnic minorities have more hurdles to overcome to get back on their feet and back into work. And the fallout is potentially really grim. We're on course to see a COVID generation that is devastated by depression, anxiety, and even suicide, drink and drug abuse, low motivation, self-worth, no hope. An entire generation could be lost to long-term unemployment. COVID-19 is turning from a health crisis into an economic catastrophe. So I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome a brilliant panel today. We have Laura Jane Rawlings, who's the CEO of Youth Unemployment UK, Alex Stephanie, who founded Beam, which is a crowdfunding platform that supports homeless people get trained and into jobs, and Pip Jameson, who's the founder and CEO of The Dots, which has been heralded as the new LinkedIn, and it's like really super inclusive. They have a membership that's 68% female, 31% ethnic minority, and 16% LGBT. So it's a super panel. Really excited to talk to you today. Laura Jane, if I can start with you. The government has been announcing skills and jobs packages left, right and centre over the last few weeks. These include Kickstart and a lifetime skills guarantee to help young people into training and jobs. But is it enough?
It's a great question, and thanks for having us, Olivia, and that introduction. Youth Employment UK have been working with partners right at the beginning of March. We formed a coalition called the Youth Employment Group, understanding the impact that COVID would have on youth unemployment. And we've been working as a collective now with over 150 organisations to support policy development. And Kickstart was one of those policies we were asking for. And, the Kickstart, just for those that don't know, is a work experience programme where the work experience placement is funded by the government. So they will pay for a young person to join a business as a work experience student, and the government are paying the wages and providing additional cash for wraparound training and support. But it's not going to be enough. It's an ambitious plan. There's a lot of money being spoken about, but our young people, as you talked about, have faced the hardest transition from education into employment than we have seen, as you say, since the 1980s. All of those challenges that you've just referenced, social disadvantage, education disadvantage, race, disability, they have all just widened. Those gaps have widened in society because of COVID, and that transition is going to be harder again for many young people. The concerns that we've got really is, looking at that spending review and then looking at some of the kind of policy that's coming out of it, is that, with up to 1.5 to 2 million young people not in education, employment or training by the end of this crisis, we need to create 1.5 to 2 million jobs. It needs to be over 1,000 opportunities a day being created to get us back to pre-youth unemployment levels, pre-COVID youth unemployment levels. And there's certainly not 1,000 opportunities being created today. You only need to go onto the Debenhams website to know that, right?
Yeah, thank you very much, Laura Jane. So obviously a key to this is employers. And I know from the work that we've done at Nesta is employers have very little to go on aside from grades often, but we're talking about much more needs to be done here. What do you think employers could do more of, or how could they be incentivised to be taking on more young people?
Yeah, so we're a youth-led organisation, and often young people tell us that they don't feel confident they'll find a good quality opportunity where they live. In our Youth Voice Census this year, which is a big survey we do annually with young people told us that they felt the barriers to employment were their race and ethnicity, their mental health and well-being, and disability. So young people don't feel that employers are particularly youth-friendly, and it was with young people back in 2014 that we created a youth-friendly employer badge that employers can sign up to free of charge, committing to good practice, and then we help them to understand what that good practice looks like for all young people, including those most disadvantaged. So there are opportunities for employers to get help and get expert advice and guidance, and actually we do that for free. And then we can help those employers connect. We have 1.5 million young people using our skills and careers website every year, and so we can connect those young people to those good quality employers. And it's about that ambition of for me, it's about employers going, want to make a difference. I want to help people in my community, and I'm going to do this really well. I'm going to recognise these challenges. And taking Kickstart as an example isn't about getting free labour. I'm really worried that we'll see a lot of that behaviour. It is about going, actually, here's an opportunity for us to give somebody this amazing opportunity into our business to develop skills and behaviours that are going to set them for life with a future career. And I really urge employers to kind of have that shift in mindset now about our role that we've all got in our communities to kind of support this young generation coming through, because they didn't write this. You know, this is something that has absolutely happened to them. And for some young people, they are now already 9-10 months out of employment, and that scarring impact is really something to worry about.
That's really good initiative there that your organisation's been doing. That actually leads me to a question I have for you, Pip. You've got a fantastic network of people on the dots, but how do underrepresented groups get a look in when these things are becoming really competitive and there's thousands of people applying for the same jobs?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a bit heartbreaking to kind of watch, I guess, because our community is so diverse, and you're spot on that they're the ones that are being hit the worst. I mean, we've seen like a 10x increase across the board in applications, which is just phenomenal. It varies by industry to industry, obviously. You know, you've got retail being hit horrifically, but then you have tech obviously thriving. So really, like, I guess my role at the moment within the DOTS has been helping our community navigate this new world. And, you know, there's about 5,000 opportunities on the DOTS at the moment, but they might not be in the career that you trained for or that you studied at school. So a lot of what we've been doing is we have like a upskilling section on the DOTS where organisation help with upskilling. So we work with the likes of Google and General Assembly. So it's basically helping our community tap into free upskilling opportunities. And a big part of what we've been doing is we signed up around 500 mentors, which were senior industry leaders right at the beginning of the pandemic, who are helping give back to the next generation, helping them navigate the new norm. I think if there is a sort of a silverish lining, I think what I've found really heartening is how many senior leaders do want to give back and how many are trying to give if they can. And also organizations, you know, people like General Assembly are giving away free coding courses right now. And I guess everything we're trying to do is mobilize all those good people out there to help as much as they can, because there's definitely intent to help. I guess we just try and help connect the dots.
Yeah, it's really good. I think I think what's really exciting is this shift to purpose over profit, and I hope that this is the model that's going to be adopted and scaled. I think it's the only way forward, isn't it? What you mentioned, Pip, is interesting because there's lots and lots of talking about upskilling, reskilling. At the beginning of 2020, there was around 2 million people who changed their occupations just because they were, you know, the industries don't exist and the work doesn't exist. But particularly vulnerable people always have the hardest time trying to find training, and it's often very expensive and time consuming and doesn't really fit around their current obligations, especially if they've got children or other responsibilities. So it'd be great to hear from all three of you what you think is needed in addition to the packages that are out there at the moment or the support that's out there to help people find the training they need. Maybe, Alex, we could hear from you.
Sure. Morning, everyone. I'm really pleased to be on this. So what we do at Beam is to support some of the most disadvantaged and vulnerable people in our society to get into stable work and become financially independent. And these individuals are typically homeless, living in homeless hostels, women's refuges, predominantly in London, facing multiple challenges, often historic addiction problems, mental health problems. We've kind of really seen pretty much everything in the 3 years we've been running, including some very, very complex issues like people who've been victims of FGM and have been human slaves and horrendous things. Typically, these individuals have been out of work 5.5 years before they are referred to the Beam service from a network of government partners, both central government, local government, and also about 40 plus charity partners. The way we support people into work is really totally unique. However, we use crowdfunding and a very community-led approach. So thousands of people use beam.org every month to crowdfund training and other financial barriers that those individuals may need. And of course, these are very specific to the individual. People may need their training paid for. If they're going to become a plumber, there'll be some plumbing training, but there are all kinds of other financial barriers that might stand in someone's way. Childcare is a common one because we work a lot with single mums in women's refuges. Transport, tools, textbooks, the sort of list goes on. And I think what is so unusual and really quite unique about this service is that it is really community powered. So the average person using the Beam service to get out of this long-term rut in their life and back on their feet and in work is supported by about 300 people, would be about the average. And these individuals are not only funding their campaigns, but even more importantly, they are sending messages to the individuals, messages of hope that are absolutely instrumental in rebuilding people's confidence. Because of course, if you've been out of work for even a few months, let alone, half a decade or more, you can feel so dehumanized, so brought down and so worthless. And all of these things can be completely independent of your strengths and your assets and abilities. And having hundreds of people send you messages is really this moment of transformation. And I think that's key to why the success we've been having.
I think that's really interesting, Alex, because at the beginning we were talking about there's so many shocking headlines at the moment about how young people are suffering the worst depression, anxiety, and mental health issues that they've had for years and years and years. And I think it's extremely worrying for anyone who's working in the area and the charities that are super stretched at the moment. And of course, then if you're out of work for long periods of time, as all the research shows, that just makes things worse and worse and worse. So there's a real worry about how you can motivate and ensure people's motivation is there to pull themselves out of the pit of despair and then keep applying for jobs and applying for jobs. Have you got any ideas about what we could learn from what you've done at Beam to help, millions of young people are probably going to be in this situation?
Well, I think that people write themselves off too easily, and I think governments write off people too easily as well. So on that second point, the majority of the people who've got into work using Beam were receiving a government benefit because they were quite unable to work. We basically put an institutional sort of stamp on their back and said, you cannot work, you are too X, Y, or Z. And that is a terrible blow to someone's self-worth to basically be branded in that kind of way. So you are economically useless, you're going to live on handouts the rest of your career. And I think the other thing we do is we internalize a lot of these things and we think we are unable to contribute and achieve things ourselves. So I remember the very first homeless hospital I went to, Beam was just getting up and running, and I met a guy there called Tony. He'd been out of work 21 years, spent a lot of his life in prison. He'd been a drug addict and he'd been an alcoholic. He was estranged from his family. Inevitably, he was in a pretty bad place. And his first question was, I don't understand. Why would anyone help me? And fortunately, we proved him wrong, and we've been able to tap into this enormous wellspring of people that really do want to connect with others and support them to progress and fulfill their potential. The second homeless hostel I went into, I remember there was a guy there who said, well, this all sounds great, but it's not for me. I said, why not? He said, oh, well, I'm smoking weed every day. And I said to him, how long have you been doing that? And he said, I don't know, a decade. And I said, well, look, you're right. You know, Beam is not for you right now, but if you can get clean, then we can help you and would love to help you. And so about 4 months later, we got back in touch and he got clean and he used the service and got trained up and got a great job working in the construction industry. So I think how we generate hope for people is so important. And I think that, you know, fundamentally, a lot of these social problems have social solutions. And we've dealt with these social problems in this kind of post-World War welfare state command and control method for so long. And the effect on people is to be very dehumanizing and institutionalizing. And so I think we need to bring people back into the equation, and technology has a massive part to play in how we can do that.
Pip and Laura Jane, I can see you both nodding furiously along with this. Maybe Pip, have you got some thoughts on this area as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's stuff you can do on an individual level first and foremost. You know, I love what Alex was saying in terms of a collective of 300 people supporting people. I mean, I think everyone's individual responsibilities is to give back if you're privileged enough to do so. So, you know, that's either via mentorship, that's either via, and we're seeing a massive rise on skill swap and actually peer-to-peer learning. So if you can do that. We've actually also worked on a project with Google, which is a connector project. And this is where people at Google, responsibility is to help connect young people with people of influence, because a lot of the barriers are around networks. You know, if you're a privileged, come from a middle-class background, you know a friend of a friend who can make an introduction into that company. But if you don't have that. And so you have a powerful individual responsibility to either be a connector, a mentor, or share your skills. So I think that's really important. And anyone listening who wants to be a mentor on the dots, please email me. It's pip@the-dots.com. But I think on an organizational level, you know, I was mentioning that wonderful people like, you know, General Assembly are giving back by giving free coding courses, and obviously Google's got their digital garage. I think as a company leaders, we also have a responsibility to go, what tools do we have in our armory to give back? And then obviously at a governmental level, you know, we've really got to start investing in skills, and not in a crazy like ad way with a ballerina going to become a cybersecurity data expert way. Like that just, you know, let's be realistic. You know, you're not like, you know, ballerina is not going to become a data expert very easily, but you can pivot slightly and just evolve your skill sets to be more relevant. And so you don't have to completely reinvent yourself. A lot of the skills you have can be relevant, but I think we've just got to help people navigate that there's opportunities out there if you pivot your skills slightly, as opposed to totally having to reinvent yourself, which is very scary, especially for young people.
Thanks, Pip. Laura Jane, you work directly with young people. What are you hearing from them that feels like it's missing from this piece in terms of the extra support they need? And Pip mentions a very good thing about skills training, actually, because there's a lot of human skills that we've been talking about for years that people need, and especially young people, to adapt and cope with the crises. And this has been a major experiment this year in just that. So the two questions I have to you are, one about the sort of mental health support, or what young people are saying, and something about how people can access this training or reskilling that we keep saying is so important.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, you know, Pip's quite right. Social networks are a big issue, and this issue of social mobility. We did a piece of work with Newcastle University a couple of years ago, where, you know, the report identified that in order to progress, you need to have economic capital, social capital, cultural capital transferred from, you know, your parents to the child, for the child to be able to make progress. And for so many young people, just by the virtue of who they were born to, don't get those opportunities for that transfer of capital. And so unless society steps in, we will always have that kind of shortage there. We'll always have those gaps there. So it's really important. I think it's really important to recognise the real science and evidence that sits behind some of those issues and understand what needs to be done on a very practical level. I think local approaches are really, really important. And I think local approaches are really important because the context locally around the country changes. If you're in the London bubble, that is a whole different world to being a young person in Manchester and Telford right now, or living in some of the more rural areas that don't have transport and don't have great skyscraping buildings like Google to offer opportunity. So aspirations change in those environments because young people are just not exposed to that type of opportunity. There is a lot of structural issues around all of this. There isn't a quick fix, and that is the problem with youth unemployment. It is going to take the most concerted social effort to make a difference here. There's a lot of silo working, a lot of people doing a little bit of great stuff in pockets, and it doesn't reach all young people, and we still end up with those kind of chasms of gaps. Just on your questions then, what young people tell us, I think I wouldn't do my job well enough if I didn't tell you that repeatedly when we do our Youth Voice Census or when we talk to young people, and as a youth-led organisation, we have over 50 young people who volunteer with us. I have a board of young people, and I have a director who is a young person. You have to really live this. I think organisations do out to young people a lot and don't internalize what that means to them as employers, and I think that's really a big takeaway for me. But what young people tell us whenever we're talking to them, whenever they're responding to questions that we're running, they want personal one-to-one stuff. So I love Pip's mentoring concept, because actually getting to know somebody on an individual level, and Alex gave that example perfectly, that until you get to know that individual and their barriers, you can't come up with solutions. And it does drive me potty that we try and get a solution to an entire generation, because, and largely those solutions are being designed by grown-ups who have come from privilege. To think what it is like to have been a 16-year-old this year who would have been doing their GCSEs, who had 5 years of training drilled into them that is a measure of success, that lost that, who didn't get to finish school properly, who didn't get their end of year expectations in terms of comms and saying goodbyes, or the graduates or the A-level students. We don't know what that's like. We can't talk to those issues. So we have to get to know young people on an individual level if we're to make real change. And so that's really important to me. The mental health issue has been there before COVID, and it will be there much after COVID, because we are focusing on success measures that are hard to attain. How many people go up to a young person and go, what do you want to be when you grow up? They're 14. Why are we asking a 14-year-old to pick a career for life? The pressure we put on young people is a crazy thing that we do. So that mental health challenge is there. We've just finished a project in Manchester that I think is really key to this. The mayor wanted to create a young person's guarantee, and actually the services, the mental health services, they're ramping up. They couldn't have worked harder this year, and neither could the welfare system. They have worked really hard to try and be there in really difficult circumstances for a hell of a lot of young people and all ages. For many young people, it's not knowing those services exist. We are not getting those services out into the communities that need them. So it's not to say the things don't exist that can solve some of this. It is the connection between them that is the biggest challenge. And perhaps back to Alex's point, in where technology has a real role to play in that connectivity between opportunity and service and young people in need is still the thing that scarily we haven't fixed.
I think that's a really good point, and has some synergy with the work that we've been doing probably collectively for years around digital skills. We feel like we've been beating the everyone needs digital skills drum for a long time, and we've been doing a lot of this at Nesta. But of course, this year showed that if you don't have a computer, you don't have a device, you don't have the access, you're completely cut off. You can't get the services or information you need. So maybe this is an opportunity to accelerate that sort of work and ensure everyone's included, so at least they can get online and participate in a better way. We've got a few more minutes, and you've all raised some fabulous points and also given some really good examples. I guess to sort of wind up, if you had one wish for next year or one message you'd like to give government, you can choose it. It can be a wish or it can be a message for government. What would you like to see happen, or what would you like to say? How about hearing from you first, Pip?
Oh, That is such a tough one. I mean, you know, it's so true. Like there's no one, I think we've got to stop thinking there is one thing that fixes everything. You know, it is on an individual basis. So I think if there was one thing, it was start working with more organizations more openly to support. There's lots of people doing wonderful things right now. So try and harness the power, there's technology providers like us. There's wonderful organizations like Beam, for example. So I think it's just got to be a collaboration between lots of people doing lots of things and realizing there's just going to be no silver bullet to this.
Thanks, Pip. Alex, have you got, you must be inundated at Beam. I mean, sadly, the statistics show, I mean, presumably the success of Beam is there'd be no Beam, but sadly it looks like you're going to be inundated over the next 18 months. Have you got a key dream or message you'd like to give?
Sure, yeah, that's exactly right, unfortunately. So people are being referred to the service all the time, every day in increasing numbers, particularly from local authorities. And the total number of people is up about 600% year on year. Where it will be 12 months from now, obviously, we'll have to wait and see, but it could well be significantly greater still. One piece of advice for government, I suppose I would encourage government to think about what technology can do, community-driven technologies, network-driven technologies. I think the fundamental question that government in the social space needs to answer in the next decade is what would the welfare state look like if it was invented after the internet? And I think the answer to that question is something radically more human, radically more effective, and radically cheaper than what we have today. And it's not just the job of government to answer that question. It's also the job of entrepreneurs, corporates, and the civic community, I think, more broadly. I think specifically, I would love to see more community-driven approaches tested and deployed. What does that look like? Because it sounds like a bit of a waffly cliche. Well, I'll talk about a thing I know about, which is supporting people off welfare benefits and into a place of financial health and independence. Typically, we've solved that problem by effectively putting recruiters or job center work coaches onto this issue. That's not the optimal way to solve long-term unemployment. And we know it's not the optimal way to solve unemployment because that is not the normal way that people get jobs. The vast majority of people are getting jobs through networks. About 80-90% of people are getting jobs through social networks, professional networks. It's exactly the sort of network gap that we need to close. That is how people overwhelmingly get jobs. So that is the approach that we need to replicate to serve people who do not have those pre-existing social and professional networks. So our approach is radically different. If someone has been living in a women's refuge for 10 years and overcoming various issues and they want to become an electrician, they will be connected with other people who are electricians and retired electricians, and we will leverage a new professional network to support them rapidly into work. Why is this approach the approach government should follow? One, it's human and treats people with dignity. Two, it's more effective and will save significant amounts of taxpayer money. And on that note, actually, we've done a report with McKinsey, which we are in the process of releasing, which basically compares our service to other existing services, and we're getting more than twice as many people from the same cohort into work. So we've got kind of a really nice data set to show that these new approaches are proven, they do work, and that government should therefore be thinking about how they can help scale them up.
That's really exciting, Alex. It's all about data-driven solutions sometimes, isn't it? And you're taking such a massive challenge and doing such a great job. That's really good takeaway. Laura Jane, in the last few minutes, it'd be wonderful to hear from you what you think.
For government, I would take it a step beyond just what Alex was saying, and I think the education to employment journey needs thinking about, not just the welfare piece of that puzzle. It is the entire journey. Thinking about, are we educating young people with the right skills and knowledge to live in this ever-changing world that we are, to have the resilience to cope with the year of 2020 and beyond. So we do need to sit and have a big rethink about some of those systems around our young people and some of the systems that cause barriers and challenges. So that's my wish for government, to get brave and bold about that. And because there are lots of experts and lots of evidence of what good could really look like, and I think we're going to start taking some bold steps there. More generally, I think society's got to be kinder to each other and stop making massive assumptions about generations and young people, but actually that sits across lots of different categories too. Getting to know people and being more connected is going to have to be the way where we solve some of these. But I know time is running out. I probably could come up with another 100, Olivia, but I'll let you wrap up.
Well, thank you so much. It's a topic that obviously we could talk about for hours and hours, but I think it was wonderful to hear from the three of you. I'm really, really grateful. Thank you very much for joining us today and also providing such really great examples of things that individuals, employers, government, non-profits can get involved in, like practical solutions. So, I mean, it feels very desperate and it feels very worrying and sad and shocking, but actually there's a lot that we can achieve by working together, I think, and being more collaborative and putting our, the good stuff first. So I really, really thank you for your time today on this really important topic.